Was this an alien abduction caught on camera? Watch this. So a man walks out of his front door, then all of a sudden, it looks like he has beamed up to outer space. The alleged alien abductee had this to say about the whole incident.
I think it got caught up in the recording, and for whatever the loop got stuck.
So it stopped recording, and you had walked out of frame, and it looked like you disappeared.
Right, right.
So the explanation he gave doesn't really make sense because you can clearly see that the camera continues to record and it looks like he is beamed up to outer space. Some people might argue that it's a bug flying across the screen, but if we go frame by frame here, we can clearly see that it's not a bug and it's his body doing this. And if it is a bug flying across the screen, why does he disappear after the bug flies across the screen? So I think that this was either some video editing or he was actually abducted by aliens and he doesn't remember because they wiped his memories. Or maybe he does remember and some Men in Black type dudes told him to keep his mouth shut about it.
Lawrence Joseph Bader. At the time of his disappearance in 1957, Bader was in some hot waters financially, in trouble with the IRS, and with a wife who was due any day with the couple's fourth kid. Bader was overwhelmed by the world around him and believed there was only one thing he could do. So one night in '57, after paying the premium on his life insurance policy, Bader packed his suitcase, kissed his wife, and said he was going on a fishing trip. Next, he rented a boat, despite being warned there was a dangerous storm heading his way, and sailed off. The next day, the boat was found washed up on the shore, empty, with no sign of Bader or his luggage. After an investigation that proved fruitless, Bader was declared dead, and his family was devastated, but went on to live their life without him for the next 8 years. That was until his niece ran into a strangely familiar man who looked just like her supposed to be dead uncle. The man denied being who she thought he was, but later fingerprints confirmed that the man who went by the name Fritz Johnson was indeed the long-lost Lawrence Bader. But there was a twist. Bader, or Johnson as he now went by, had no recollection of his former life, and appeared to have suffered amnesia. But now found alive, his former wife was required to repay the life insurance and break off her engagement with the new beau since she was Catholic. Some say the amnesia was all an act, but he also had a sizable brain tumor that others believed could have caused the memory loss. Either way, it's a wild story. Coming in at number 9 is Timothy Carney. While on his way to work in September of 2004, Timothy realized he was running a little late and called his employer to let him know. But when he never showed up, his colleagues began to feel worried. Then later, after his car was found abandoned, family and friends of the 25-year-old began to fear that he may have been kidnapped, and began renting billboards pleading for his safe return home. Sadly, no such calls with his whereabouts were ever made, and eventually the case went cold. But 7 years later, the family got the strangest news, that their son's missing persons case had been cleared from the national database as he had finally been found. However, after a brief moment of relief, they were next informed that Timothy was not interested in speaking with them, nor would he permit that his location be revealed. While no one is quite sure exactly what he was doing while hiding out for 7 years, due to the fact that he's declined to go into detail, his parents suspect he got wrapped up with a local church that has on more than one occasion been accused of cult-like behavior. If that's true, he certainly wouldn't be the first victim of a cult that convinced its victims to stay away from their family. However, Timothy has allegedly denied the claims that his disappearance had anything to do with that, so really, who knows what the hell happened. Coming in at number 8, Lula Gillespie Miller. Soon after bringing her third little one into the world in 1974, Lula mysteriously signed her kids into her parents' custody, left her home, and walked off without a trace. Soon after she disappeared, her parents filed a missing persons report. Then, about a year later, in 1975, the family received a letter from Lula, and although relieved that she was alive, that was the last they heard from her for years. For the next 41 years, still considered a missing person by authorities, Lula stayed silent, away from her family and living her life. She never committed committed any crimes while in hiding, nor was she running away from any that anyone knew of, and so the great mystery of why a woman ran away from her life remained a mystery. Of course, there were many investigations over the 41 years that looked into her disappearance, some believing she had taken her own life, others believing she was kidnapped, until finally in 2016, authorities tracked her down in a small town in South Texas, where she had apparently been living since the 90s under an assumed name. Once found, Lula declined to give any explanation about her disappearance from her life in Indiana, but did grant her contact information to be given to her family so that they could reach out if they wanted to.
Number 7. Bulowville, Florida. This land was destined for use as a plantation by Charles Bulow in 1821. The goal was to house and grow cotton, indigo, rice, and even sugarcane, with an additional mill building under the construction of John Bulow. The local natives, the Seminole Indian tribe, didn't appreciate their land being turned into profit and set fire to the setup around January 11, 1836. And listen, I usually don't support arson, but in this case, good for them. Abandoned by January 23rd, a great rosy glow was observed on January 31st in St. Augustine. John Bulow, discouraged by the destruction, died 3 months later at the age of 26 and was buried in St. Augustine. All that is left today of this plantation are the ruins of the sugar mill, several wells, a spring house, and a crumbling foundation of the mansion. The cleared fields have been reclaimed by the forest, and the area looks much as it did when it belonged to the Seminoles. Number 6. Roanoke Island, North Carolina. The legend of Roanoke Island has been passed down from generation to generation since 1590, when a group of 120 English settlers mysteriously vanished. In the late 1500s, the English made their first attempts to settle in North America on Roanoke Island, which is off the coast of North Carolina. These first settlers ended up returning to England because of a shortage of food and Indian attacks. In 1587, a second colony was founded on Roanoke. It was then that Virginia Dare, the first baby born to English parents in North America, was born. John White, the leader of the colony, went to England to get more supplies, but when he returned in 1590, the settlement was deserted. All the settlers had mysteriously disappeared, and the only clue he found was the word Croatoan carved in a tree. Croatoan was the name of an island south of Roanoke that was home to a Native American tribe of the same name. Perhaps then the colonists were abducted by Native Americans, but to this day no one knows what happened to them. Number 5. Langville, Montana. Langville was actually a real town in a small rural spot, possibly on the eastern plains. Now apparently it vanished entirely sometime in the early 2000s. The town even showed up on Google Maps, but no one could find it in person. Google Maps apparently has saved images from street views, but no map of the town. There's also been more than 7 million recorded searches for the town, and they have come up with no one seems to know why or explain this, as it doesn't exist. Today you'll struggle to find any photos or online mention of it. Legend has it that sometime in the early 1900s, a mysterious force swept over Langville and turned its inhabitants inside out. The inside out inhabitants either died off or disappeared shortly after. Then some entity or organization didn't want anyone to know what happened. They came along and washed away all evidence of the town's existence. The cover-up went so far as to scrub the internet of any mentions, evidence, or accounts. Believers would tell you that Langville disappeared because its people vanished under nefarious circumstances. Furthermore, they believe the government wants to keep it a secret from us, and it seems like only the inhabitants could give us the truth. Number 4. St. Pierre, Martinique. In the late 1890s and early 1900s, St. Pierre, Martinique was known as a beautiful town, but they had something unique: a volcano. Now, citizens of the area were so used to the volcanic activity that no one took it seriously when fresh steaming vent holes and earth tremors started during April 1902. The minor explosions began at the summit of the volcano, ash began to rain down continuously, and the nauseating stench of sulfur filled the air. Again, no one thought this was an issue and that they should have left town. Even worse, more than 100 snakes slithered down and invaded the town. Then on May 5th, a landslide of boiling mud and water from the Etang Set crater lake spilt into the River Blanche. It was followed by a tsunami that ended the lives of hundreds of people. Then 3 days later, May 8th, Mount Pelee exploded, sending an avalanche of white-hot lava straight towards the town. Within 3 minutes, St. Pierre was completely obliterated, and of its 30,000 population, there were only 2 people who survived. This was the worst volcanic disaster of the 20th 20th century. Number 3. The New City Complex, New Jersey. This town was originally called the New City Complex, but later was called Demon's Alley, and you'll find out why. Located along Route 23, the town was built by the City of New York Water and Reservoir Plant in order to house the workers of the facility. Things seemed to be pretty normal for a while, and then in 1992 it was found that the homes were abandoned with no sign of burglary and everything in order, all possessions left behind, and in some cases even meals left out for people who would never come home to eat them. Ever since, legends have abounded. One very popular story is that in the 1980s a stranger moved into the town, after which there were various unexplained phenomena, and it was soon suspected that this newcomer was a cult leader. The mysterious individual then apparently led most of the townspeople down into the basement of one of the homes on false pretenses, and then proceeded to have their lives ended by members of his cult. Now, there is no evidence that this took place, but the legend persists. Other theories are that the homes are abandoned set of a movie, or the site of a bout of rando or carbon monoxide poisoning, or that it was haunted, but no one really knows. For now, these houses sit rotting away and have become a popular urban legend in the area. Number 2. Erkhammer, Iowa. This small rural town was apparently in rather good shape until around 1928, when some aerial photos emerged that appeared to show that there was no one living there, and that the field looked overgrown and untended. Things took a turn for the weird when there was a report from a tourist passing through who stopped at a gas station in the town to fill his tank, after which he had learned he had been ripped off and there was no gasoline in there at all. He then angrily headed back to town, but reported that he could not reach it, as it seemed to forever remain in the distance no matter how fast he drove. Even when he ran out of gas and walked, he could not reach the town, which was still sitting there before him, forever out of his reach. Other people driving past the town began to report that the previously bustling town seemed to be abandoned and lifeless, and when some investigated, they found rows and rows of houses sitting peacefully with no sign of the occupants. Other reports of anomalies would come in from the town as well, such as people who seemed to have witnessed the town actually evaporating into thin air, as if being absorbed into some other dimension, with one such account concerning a group fleeing from the area during the Dust Bowl of 1932 and going to the town to retrieve supplies. And coming in at number 1 is Ashley, Kansas. Ashley was a tiny farming community of around 700 people, and on August 16, 1952, the area was rocked by a massive earthquake measuring 7.9 on the scale. When investigators finally arrived, it was oddly found that there was simply no one there. There was a smoking, heat-belching blaze fissure measuring 1,000 yards in length and approximately 500 yards in width. They found no one there, neither alive nor dead, even after a 12-day intensive search. An aftershock allegedly rocked the region in the coming days after the aborted search, and when rescuers arrived this time, the fissure was reportedly gone as mysteriously as it had appeared. Now, days before everyone disappeared on August 8th, there was a report from a local who claimed he had seen a small black opening in the sky, and not long after, police were bombarded with calls reporting the same thing. Things got stranger still when reports kept coming in about the weird atmospheric anomalies, and that there were also people who had mysteriously gone missing without a trace. Other reports would filter in that the town was in total darkness, as if the sun had never risen. Perhaps even more bizarre still were the reports that people were having conversations with long dead family members. Police would get hundreds of similar calls in the coming days, after which it was claimed that all of the children in the town had spontaneously vanished middle of the night on August 12, 1952. And by August 16th, everyone was gone.
And we're starting off this list with Kenny Veach. Kenny Veach was an experienced hiker and explorer who went missing in 2014 while searching for a peculiar cave in the Nevada desert. Kenny shared in a YouTube comment that he had encountered a mysterious M-shaped cave near the Nellis Air Force Base around Area 51, which had apparently caused his body to vibrate. Encouraged by other commenters, he filmed his exploration of the cave and uploaded it to his YouTube channel, Snakebite McGee, titling it M Cave Hike. Unfortunately though, on his third attempt to reach the cave, a few months later, he vanished without a trace. His cell phone was discovered near the entrance of an old mine shaft, yet his whereabouts are are still unknown. It's possible he got lost or had an accident, but the cave's proximity to Area 51 and Kenny's claims of odd vibrations led to a lot of online rumors and theories. Some speculated he might have stumbled upon significant information related to extraterrestrials or government secrets, and that his pursuit was intentionally disrupted. Despite extensive searches though, there's still no solid evidence or leads as to where he is. Next we have Ben McDaniel. Ben McDaniel disappeared in August of 2010 while exploring Vortex Spring in Florida. He dove down to explore an underwater cave roughly 58 feet below the surface. He resurfaced. It was totally fine. He refilled his tanks in preparation for a second dive later in the evening. But this time, he never returned. His truck was left behind at a dive shop. Inside it were his wallet, a cell phone, and a map of the cave. There were also 2 oxygen tanks found near the entrance of the cave. And the 2 divers who discovered them found it odd that there was just air in the tanks rather than having a mix of gas, which is typically the case when deep diving. The cave is known for being tricky to navigate with tight spaces and poor visibility, and despite a thorough search by experienced divers, he was never found. Some think he might have run into problems, maybe he got stuck or had issues with his gear, but no one knows for sure. And some even suggest he purposely disappeared or maybe faked his own vanishing, which is quite the reach, but there's still no concrete answers till this day. Next on the list is Michael Leland Vincent. Vincent went missing in Mammoth Cave National Park in Kentucky on May 5th, 2011. At the time, he was on parole and he had just set fire to his house, which he shared with his mother and aunt. Some speculated that he had attempted to burn down his house in order to fake his own death so that he could escape the consequences of his charges. Some say he may have taken his own life, but no body has ever been discovered. He lived very close to Mammoth Cave though, which is huge. In fact, it's the largest known cave system in the world. So if he did go missing in that cave, it's likely he'll never be found.
Coming in at number 7 is Denise Bolser. When Denise Bolser's husband came home on January 17th, 1985, he was horrified to find a threatening note that read, "We've got your wife," and immediately contacted the authorities so that they could start the investigation. A few days later, police discovered her husband's pickup truck abandoned at the airport with Denise's social security, birth certificate, and credit cards all inside. But things took a turn a few months later when a courier service where she worked as a bookkeeper accused her of embezzling nearly $100,000. And by 1986, police were able to charge her with the crimes in absentia, now putting together the puzzle pieces of this strange case. However, in one last twist, the embezzlement charges against her were dropped, leaving everyone just as confused as they were at the beginning. Fast forward 16 years, and a PI named Shirley Casey discovered that runaway Denise was hiding out in Florida under the name Denise James. And when authorities went to confirm the lead, they found out that Denise had started a whole new family that were completely unaware of her sordid past. Denise claims she ran away after her ex-boss threatened her life, drove her husband's truck to the airport, and never looked back. Coming in at number 6 is Michelle Whitaker. After being dropped off at a truck stop by a friend in August of 2002, Michelle vanished into thin air. At first, it was believed that her friend may have had something to do with her disappearance until one of her co-workers, Heather, disappeared 1 month later. Unaware of the connection with Michelle at first, police immediately focused on Heather's boyfriend, Jonathan Vick, who happened to be a suspect from a previous unsolved SA case. But once they realized the connection between Heather, Michelle, and Jonathan, they began to feel worried that they had a homicide case on their hands. Police began looking for any sign that Michelle still could be alive, but her credit report and social security showed no activity for years, and although they didn't have any proof yet, they began to really worry that Michelle had been killed. Then in the summer of 2008, 6 years after Michelle disappeared, a woman was watching an episode of Forensic Files, and was shocked to see one of the victims of a killer featured on the episode was none other than her next door neighbor. Confused, she called the police to let them know that she was in fact alive and living in Oregon. In August of 2008, police officially announced that Michelle had been found alive alive, apparently completely unaware that she had been the subject of a killing investigation. But why did she run away? Apparently, at the time she went missing, Michelle had recently been arrested for a DUI and was mistakenly released early from jail, so she ran away to start a new life. Coming in at number 5 is Cynthia Ann Parker. By the early 1800s, European colonization was resulting in major population drop in indigenous villages. As a result, some territories resorted to kidnapping as a way to increase their numbers. One of the most famous was on May 19, 1836, during the Fort Parker Massacre, when 9-year-old Cynthia Ann Parker was taken from her Texas farm and brought to live amongst the Comanche. Now, as far as the Texans were concerned, Parker was missing for 20 years, and they continued to search for her at her father's request, but little to their knowledge, Cynthia had actually become completely assimilated among the village. When first brought in, she was adopted by a couple who raised her as their own, and eventually she married the chief, Petacuna, with whom she had 3 children. It is believed that Cynthia would have stayed with the Comanche until her dying days. However, in 1860, the Texas Rangers finally tracked her down, and believing that they were rescuing her, raided the village, killed her husband along with many other civilians, and brought Cynthia and her daughter back to her childhood home. Her reunion with her white family was not the storybook her father expected. She was angry that she was forced to leave behind her 2 sons, and never really assimilated back into white civilization. Banned from ever returning to the Comanche, Cynthia was forced to live the rest of her life under the supervision of her brother and uncle. Then, after her daughter died from pneumonia in 1864, with nothing else to live for, Cynthia slipped into a deep depression, eventually refusing to eat or drink until she died in 1871. Coming in at number 4 is Petra Pazitska. The year was 1984 when 24-year-old Petra went to the dentist and never returned home. As is often the case with disappearance of young women, police immediately feared and suspected that she had been killed, so a massive search for the college student began. For a while after her mysterious disappearance, Petra's case was featured on a true crime show, and then in 1987, a suspect for her homicide was found, or so they thought. The man, identified as Gunter K., confessed to police that he killed Petra, as well as another teen girl in the same part of Germany. Frankly, the police had no reason to believe he was lying, and even after he withdrew his confession, it was still believed he was the killer. By 1989, Petra was officially declared dead, and for the next 26 years, the world believed she died at the hands of Gunter K. That was until 2015, when a woman named Mrs. Schneider called the police after her apartment was robbed. But when she was unable to produce any ID, she eventually fessed up to being the missing woman. Evidently, she had managed to escape out of the public eye by never opening a bank account, or getting her driver's license, or a social security card. But because she hadn't actually committed any criminal activity, she couldn't be charged with anything. To this day, Petra refuses to explain why she went into hiding, and police say she was not interested in providing the public or her family with any further information. Coming in at number 3, B.K. Doe. In 2004, a Burger King employee discovered a naked man covered in fire ants sleeping next to one of the dumpsters in the alleyway. Disturbed and worried, the employee immediately called the police, who took the stranger to the hospital. Once admitted, hospital staff tried to get information from him, but he was unable to recall his name, so he was entered into hospital records as Burger King Doe. As the days went by, BK, as he was referred to, began to recall some things. He knew he had 3 brothers, and he knew his birthday was August 29, 1948. But still, his actual identity remained a mystery to him and everyone around him. Years went by, and he eventually named himself Benjamin Kyle and began living a new life. At one point in time, he was actually on the FBI's missing persons page, which was the first time the Bureau had ever put a missing persons report out for someone whose location was known. He even appeared on an episode of Dr. Phil. But no matter what Benjamin did, he began to lose hope that he would ever figure out who he really was. But incredibly, in 2016, a genealogist came to the rescue. As it turns out, Benjamin was actually William Burgess Powell, a man who had been missing since 19 1976. However, the mystery did not end there. Even though he now had a name, there was still a huge gap. He had already been a missing person for 28 years before he was found by the Burger King dumpster, and there was no record to show where he was all those years or why he disappeared in the first place. Coming in at number 2, Carlos Sanchez Ortiz. After receiving his medical degree in 1996, promising young Dr. Carlos, who secretly suffered severe depression, decided he'd had enough of the chaotic world around him and wandered off into the woods without any warning. But after a 14-year-long search by the Spanish authorities left them without answers, the case pretty much went cold and Carlos was officially declared dead in 2010. So imagine how the two mushroom pickers that were foraging a national park off the coast of Tuscany felt when they ran into him. Despite being missing for nearly 20 years and considered legally dead for 5, Carlos was in fact very much alive. He was just living his own life in solitude as far away from civilization as possible. Nervous that he might be dangerous, the hikers ran away to get a ranger and brought him back to the site. The ranger asked a few questions about who he was, to which Carlos showed an expired passport. However, Carlos was not looking to be found. In fact, he was quite annoyed and mentioned he was now going to need to move his camp so as not to be discovered by anyone else. And last up in our number 1 spot today is JC Duggard. On the morning of June 10th, 1991, 11-year-old JC was walking to the bus stop when a suspicious gray car pulled over and tased her until she was unconscious. This tragedy, of course, ensued a giant investigation, as well as multiple search parties, but as days turned into weeks and weeks turned into years, local authorities began to lose hope. Meanwhile, JC was, in fact, alive, chained up in Philip and Nancy Garrido's shed in the backyard, and assaulted daily by her captor. At the time, Philip was on parole from a previous essay and kidnapping charge, but despite multiple visits from his officers, the backyard was never searched, and JC remained hidden from the public. For the next 18 years, she was a prisoner, forced into bearing and raising 2 of Philip's offspring, and eventually gave up all hope of escaping her living nightmare. But one day in 2009, Philip, who I should also mention was a self-proclaimed evangelist, brought his and JC's daughters on an excursion to Berkeley, attempting to organize a religious event on the campus. But the event manager felt that something was off with the man and how the girls were acting around him, so she got campus police to run a background check. It didn't take long before they figured out his history, and with that, his parole officer was immediately contacted. Thankfully, Duggard was rescued from her prison in the backyard, and the disgusting people that kidnapped and tortured her were sentenced to a lifetime in prison.
Starting us off at number 10 is the Goddard family. In September of 1999, Dr. Yves Goddard took his 2 kids Camille and Marius fishing in the ponds of Planquerie, France. I tried googling how to pronounce it, you guys, nothing was coming up, so I apologize. Now, he told the boat owner he wanted a boat for a cruise and would bring it back on the 5th, but before he left, he bought a bunch of floor cloths and cleaning products. Boat rides can get messy, I guess. Now, during a boat inspection the next day, officers found one of the kids sleeping and all seemed well other than the fact that the doctor was acting weird. The next day, a waffle vendor remembered seeing the trio, but by day 4, the boat was found abandoned. A dinghy was found nearby, and on board was Eve's checkbook and a jacket and nothing else. Authorities also found morphine and blood in the doctor's van after the family were nowhere to be found. By the 8th, the police searched the family's home where they found significant amounts of blood everywhere, and when it was tested, it turned out to be his wife's, who no one had seen since the 31st of August. Over the years, other items floated ashore the coast of Brittany, like IDs, the bones of Eve, and the skull of one of his kids. It was clear he had most likely killed his wife and then killed his whole family, including himself, but why? Coming in at number 9 is the Martin family. Back in December of 1958, Kenneth Martin, his wife, and 3 daughters went for a day trip to Columbia River Gorge and never returned. 3 days after their day trip, when Kenneth failed to show up to work and the kids failed to show up to school, the family was reported missing. The first step was searching their house, where they found everything was as normal as could be. Drying dishes, laundry, the usual. Police found the family's abandoned vehicle and nearby a handgun gun covered with dry blood. Nothing came of that, but the bodies of Susan and Virginia were found the next year. Their bodies had been floating downstream near the gorge, and autopsy results showed they had both drowned. Most people think Kenneth crashed the car into the river, whether on purpose or by accident, and that's how the whole family died. At number 8 we have the Beaumont siblings. I can't even imagine losing my siblings, they're my whole goddamn life. So way back in 1966, 9-year-old Jane, 7-year-old Anna, and 4-year-old Grant disappeared from Glenelg Beach in Australia. Their parents let them go to the beach often as they always came home by their curfew anyway. They were a good bunch of kids. But even still, I would not trust my 9-year-old to babysit my other 2 children, let alone go to a public beach alone. Anywho, when the children left at 10 AM and didn't return for their 2 PM curfew, the Beaumonts got worried. By 7:30 that night, their mother had called the police and was completely inconsolable. Witnesses at the beach said they saw the kids with a tall blonde guy with a thin face, which kinda sounds a bit like Count Olaf. Is anyone else getting that feeling? Just me? Now, a local vendor also told authorities the kids bought a meat pie, which was strange because the kids had never purchased one before and because their parents hadn't sent them out with any money. This led to more unanswered questions. Where did they get the money for the meat pie? Why did they buy it to begin with? And most importantly, where did the children go? There's still $1 million reward regarding their disappearance. Some think the man abducted them, while others fear they were washed out to sea or Grant got pulled out and his sisters attempted to save him, with all of them perishing in the process. Is it me, or does this whole case just sound a lot like the Baudelaire siblings from a series of unfortunate events? This man literally sounds like Count Olaf. It's the true story come to life.
Next we have Peter Verhulsel. Peter was exploring the Sterkfontein caves in South Africa with some friends in 1984. He had veered off the line strung through the cave, which was used to help them find their way back out. Scuba divers were sent in to try and locate him, but days, then weeks went by before his body was finally discovered, at which point it was too late. Peter was unable to find his way back to his friends, but had managed to find a small underground beach where he pulled himself out of the water. It was pitch black in there, and his oxygen tank was just about depleted, so he was completely trapped. In this multi-week long search, rescue teams would have been within 36 meters of him, but Peter didn't hear them, and the rescuers believed that he had drowned. When Peter was finally found, 6 weeks after having gone missing, it was determined that he had died of starvation. Floyd Collins. Floyd Collins met his unfortunate fate in Crystal Cave in Kentucky, a cave which he had actually discovered and had been mapping out and exploring for 8 whole years. On January 30th, 1925, while exploring the cave, Collins became trapped in a narrow passage about 150 feet away from the entrance. He had been working on creating an entrance to a grotto he had discovered down there when his gas lamp started to dim. Now, he was in a rush to make his way back out of the cave, and he accidentally knocked over his lamp, igniting it completely, or opposite of igniting it, he put it out completely, and his foot landed on an unstable part of the wall. Rocks started to shift, and one of them fell from the ceiling, pinning his leg. A rescue effort was, of course, launched, but Floyd was deep in the cave, and the difficult conditions made a rescue kind of tough to execute. Despite the attempts of rescuers, Collins remained trapped for over 2 weeks. Tragically, on February 13th, Collins finally died of exposure, hunger, possibly hypothermia. This was most likely the day he died, but his body wasn't actually retrieved until the 16th. Next up is the Nam Talu Cave incident. In 2007, Helena Carroll and her fiance John Cullen were exploring Nam Talu Cave in Thailand along with 7 other tourists. Things took a turn for the worse though, when a flash flood broke out. This giant wave gushed into the cave and swept away everyone except for Helena and John, who just started climbing in order to escape this rising water. They reached a ledge and debated what they were going to do next. John ultimately decided he was going to attempt to swim to safety and send back help. He did not survive, and Carol was found and rescued hours later. She was the only survivor. Number 4, we have what I like to call a close call. This was a story posted to Reddit by a now deleted user, but the story goes that they were exploring a cave with their family. As they were making their way out, they discovered a narrow opening in the rock, about knee high. By lying on their stomachs and squeezing through the tight space, they entered a small crawl space within the rock. The ceiling of this space was adorned with beautiful quartz crystals. Moving in one by one, the group stared up at this beautiful sight before them. The space was so tight, though, that they could feel the ceiling against their backs and the floor against their stomachs with each breath. They continued deeper, though, until the path led to an area covered in sediment formations like stalagmites and stalactites. Everyone thought this was pretty cool, but they began to feel water trickling onto their backs. They realized that it was raining outside, and the crawl space had a downward slope that would quickly fill with rainwater. The only way to escape was the way back they'd come in, and what started as a small trickle of water pretty quickly grew into streams, and the water began to accumulate. They rushed to exit, crawling out one by one, but the water was flooding in faster than they could escape, and the user who was furthest from the exit was trying very hard not to panic. They had the worst time here, crawling on their stomach with sharp crystals hanging from the ceiling again, and they struggled to keep up. The water level rose rapidly, splashing against them as they crawled, and just in time, though, they managed to crawl out as the water had reached their lips at this point, and everyone managed to get out safely. Ugh, I feel uncomfortable just reading that. At number 3, we have the Catacombs video. Now, while the Paris Catacombs isn't technically a cave, it is cavernous and dark and incredibly easy to get lost in. This is one of the most infamous pieces of found footage on the internet, as we still don't know who this person was. If you somehow have not heard about this case before, it's a POV video of a person exploring the catacombs. The camera with the footage was found later on by a group of explorers. Most of the video is pretty mundane until you start to notice that the person behind the camera seems to be getting increasingly more distressed. He starts to pick up his pace, pointing the camera around in a frantic manner as if realizing he's lost and is starting to panic. Then he's in a full-on run. The video ends with the cameraman finally dropping the camera and just running deeper into the shadowy depths of the maze of catacombs as the camera continues to film before finally running out of battery. John Edward Jones. In 2009, John Edward Jones went missing in Nutty Putty Cave, Utah. John was exploring the cave with his brother when he got stuck upside down in an uncharted narrow passage which he had mistaken for a section called the Birth Canal Passageway. Despite efforts to free him, John remained trapped in the tight space. Rescuers worked tirelessly to try and retrieve him, but in the end, they were unable to save his life. The challenging conditions of the cave made it extremely difficult. The passage was only about 10 inches wide in some places, and it was positioned at a steep angle. The rescue operation involved pulleys, ropes, and other equipment to try and free John. They even brought in specialized teams from around the country to help, but unfortunately, after nearly 28 hours of being trapped in this upside-down compressed position, John suffered cardiac arrest. Because of the dangerous conditions and the risk to the rescuers, it was decided the best course of action was to just close off the entrance to the cave, sealing it with concrete to prevent further access. And finally, we have the rescue. I thought I'd finish off the video with an uplifting story for once. Let's leave things on a good note. Uploaded in 2016 to the YouTube channel Exploring with Josh, the group of friends were exploring Ape Cave in Mount St. Helens, Oregon, when they made a pretty shocking discovery. At the start of the trek, the cave is very spacious, but pretty soon the group were on their hands and knees as they had moved further and further into the cave. It was becoming increasingly more low and narrow, and one of the guys suggested they just turn back, saying, "I don't think this is worth it, man. I don't think we're meant to crawl this far." But they continued on, and it's lucky that they did, because they came across a young girl who had got lost in the cave somehow. She didn't have anything on her, no light, nothing, but she'd managed to crawl in that far. The boys were able to bring her back to safety, where she was reunited with her parents. Luckily, she hadn't been in there very long. If they hadn't decided to explore the cave that day, who knows if she ever would have been found. So we're going to start off with Storm Area 51 and the man who went missing during this storm. Not sure what to call this situation. Wasn't really an attack. I guess like a bombardment. Anyway, I remember being pretty entertained that a group of weirdos decided to band together to do this. Some were doing it ironically, some fully believed they were going to make history, and I'm willing to bet some people had no idea why they were there. Not a lot ended up happening though. This is a heavily guarded, top secret military base, so I think you'd be crazy to think they would have gotten very far. Though a few arrests were made, including a 60-year-old woman, but one man actually went missing. The man's name has never been released to the public, but he had last been seen near the entrance of Area 51. He didn't go missing for long though. He was found and faced a trespassing fine. A little anticlimactic, but unless it wasn't really him. And they simply replaced him with an identical clone. Oh yeah. We found Zach. He has to pay a little fine. Just make sure he doesn't do this again, alright? Meanwhile, the real Zach is trapped in a pod somewhere being experimented on in Area 51. You never know. Number 9, Kenny Veach. Kenny Veach, an experienced hiker and explorer, disappeared in 2014 while looking for a strange cave in the Nevada desert. He had posted a YouTube comment stating that he had come across a strange cave shaped like an M near Nellis Air Force Base and Area 51 that had caused his body to start vibrating. He was encouraged by some commenters to search for the cave again and to capture it on film, which he did, posting a video to his YouTube channel, Snakebite McGee, entitled M Cave Hike. A couple months later, he ventured out for a third time to the cave and sadly was never seen again. His cell phone was found at the entrance of an old mine shaft, but his body has never been found. Now, he very well could have got lost or had some sort of accident, but given how close the cave is to Area 51 and the claims Kenny made about the strange vibrations he felt around it, rumors and theories of course began spreading online that he may have stumbled upon something important, possibly related to extraterrestrials or government secrets, and that his quest was intentionally thwarted. Despite extensive searches, no concrete evidence or leads have been found regarding his whereabouts. Next on the list we have Jerry Freeman. Now, although this guy didn't go missing, he did trek quite close to the forbidden military base, and according to him, he was actually within the restricted area. Although the exact borders of Area 51 are sometimes a bit unclear. Jerry Freeman, an archaeologist, decided in 1997 that he was going to embark on this 7-day trek into the highly restricted Nevada test site. He wasn't going because he wanted to try and learn the secrets of Area 51. He was actually going in order to trace the trail of the lost 49ers, a group of pioneers who had traversed the area in 1849, many of which ended up losing their lives. He was in search of an inscription made by one of the pioneers, which was believed to be in NYE Canyon on the Nellis Air Force Base, which is of course completely off limits. Freeman had quite the adventure. He spent his time avoiding security, sleeping with nothing but a blanket and the clothes on his back. He traveled very light, and by the end of his trek he almost completely ran out of water. He never found what he was looking for, but he did claim to have seen Area 51. Freeman had climbed a ridge above the canyon looking down on Papu's Dry Lake, which is just south of Area 51. He claimed that during the day he didn't really see much, but that night had seen lights, one of which looked like it was coming from a security vehicle perhaps, and one which was stationary but seemed to grow and shrink in size, which could have been a hangar door opening and closing in the distance.
Filling at number 7 slot is the MV Joyita, I hope. Now, back in 1955, a fishing and charter boat was lost at sea, missing its intended destination by 5 weeks. There were around 25 passengers and crew aboard the vessel, and admittedly, they all knew the ship was in extremely poor condition before they set off. The radio only had a range of 2 miles, and it had a bunch of corroded pipes all over it. Regardless of all that, the ship was incredibly buoyant, so how could it have even sank? The air search mission couldn't find the boat anywhere, but a merchant ship managed to find it drifting 600 miles away from its origin with no crew or cargo. All they found was a doctor's bag and a ton of bloody bandages, with the radio turned to the universal distress signal. Other than those clues that they left behind, no one knows what happened, and the crew was never seen again. Who was bleeding? Where did they try and go to get help? Why did they get on board to begin with? So many unanswered questions. Now at number 6 is the Gill family. Back in January of 2002, an Argentinian family of 6 were reported missing with no one knowing their whereabouts. thereabouts. Ruben and his wife Margarita worked as landlords and were a pretty basic family. On the 12th, they went to a family friend's house, and that was the last time anyone saw them. Police investigation revealed that Ruben had called a woman in Rosario multiple times the next day, but were unable to trace her. No relative or friend knew anything, but were sure they wouldn't have just disappeared voluntarily. They didn't have a car, they both had jobs, their kids were in school, they have no reason to leave. In 2006, the family's lawyer claimed the police were involved in the disappearance because they had been in a previous one. 2 years later, a raid was carried out at the home and they had found dugout wells all over the property and cleaned up blood on the floor. Ruben was a fun, sociable person, but in the days before the disappearance, he seemed quiet and worried. Different provinces were searched too, but with no new leads. What was also odd was how the landlord of their new home said they had left behind all their money and possessions, but when the police got there, nothing was found. He had also weirdly given them a 3-month vacation that month when he had never in their life before given them longer than 2 weeks. And apparently the two parties didn't like each other much either, so where'd the family go? My guess, the landlord got rid of them. Coming in at number 5 is the Mary Celeste. People have such official names for ships, I swear I would name mine something short and sweet like the Oyster or the Pearl. Anyway, on the morning of the 7th of November 1872, Captain Briggs, his wife and daughter, as well as a 7-member crew set out on a journey from New York to Italy. The journey was meant to take 1 month, but the ship never reached its destination. A British ship called the Del Gracia saw the Mary Celeste drifting in the Atlantic near Portugal, so the crew decided to investigate. 6 months worth of food was found as well as all the crew's belongings, but the lifeboat had been used and deployed. The floorboards were under 3 feet of water, but the state of the ship was fine. It wasn't flooded and it definitely wasn't beyond repair. The captain of the Del Gracia actually knew Captain Briggs and knew he was a very capable sailor, so the scene made no sense. Till this day, no one knows what happened to anyone on board. It's speculated that they abandoned the ship thinking the damage was worse than it was, but then didn't survive after that. And number 4 is Roanoke, aka the Lost Colony. Back in 1587, Josh White led a colony to Roanoke Island, which is present-day Dare County in North Carolina. Now before Josh, 2 attempts were already made to try and found the first English settlement in North America, but both attempts failed due to various reasons. The main one being bad relations with the local Native Americans and the settlers. Either way, when Josh got there, supplies and resources were slim, and so he went back to England to get more supplies in 1588. He told the residents of the colony that if the colony was taken by force, to carve a cross in a nearby tree so he'd know that that's what happened. Like, I love how he'd think if the colony was being overtaken, the first thing anyone would think to do would be like, oh wait, amidst this pillaging, let me quickly carve a cross into this tree. Either way, he ended up coming back in 1590 to find the settlement meticulously abandoned. All the fortifications were dismantled with care, but he found no carved cross anywhere. Instead, he found the word Croatoan carved into a post, and that was the name of a native tribe that were allied with the English at the time. White assumed that meant the colonists moved to Croatoan Island, but investigations pointed to them being killed by the Powhatan tribe, yet there was no evidence of a massacre, so again, we have no idea where they went. Filling at number 3 slot is Carol A. Deering. In August of 1920, the schooner, which had 10 crewmen aboard, set sail from Norfolk, Virginia to Rio de Janeiro with their cargo of coal. The original captain of the ship got ill a few days before its departure, so he was replaced and off the ship went, and they reached their destination safely, and they all lived happily ever after. Not, that's never the case on Top 10. A lightship keeper said he saw the ship on its way home and was hailed by an unidentifiable crewman who claimed the ship had lost its anchors. The keeper tried to report it, but his radio wasn't working, so he couldn't, but what he found odd was that the crew seemed to be milling around suspiciously for no reason. The next day, another ship saw the Deering near Outer Banks, which was weird because that would have been a strange course for them to take if the ship was really on its way to Virginia. A day later, it was found aground and on the Diamond Shoals with its sails still set, but all the lifeboats missing. Due to bad weather, it took surf boats 5 days to reach the ship, and as expected, it was completely abandoned. All the crew's personal belongings were gone, papers, the anchors, even key navigational equipment, all gone. Despite an extensive search, no logs were found either. But the most viable explanation people have come up with is that a mutiny must have occurred due to the crew's apparent dissatisfaction with the new captain, who already had an uneasy relationship with the crew. Is that not dramatic? Now at number 2 are the Sodder children. This one is long and detailed, so keep up people, it's worth it. Fayetteville, Virginia, Christmas Eve 1945. Italian immigrants George and Jenny Sodder went to bed along with 9 of their 10 children. The last one was away in the army. Yes, it was a huge family, I know. Now that night a fire broke out in the house and 4 children escaped, but 5 disappeared without a trace. George tried to go back in to get the remaining 5 children who were all upstairs, but the downstairs floor and staircase were already engulfed in flames. So he tried something else. Now he usually kept a ladder propped against the house, so he thought he'd use that, but that was also suspiciously missing, and he then thought he would drive his truck next to the window, climb on top of it, and go up from there. But again, weirdly, neither truck would start despite them being perfectly fine the day before. They even called the fire department twice but got no response, and by the time the crew came, it was 8 AM and the house was just a pile of ash. After the investigation was over, there was no bodily remains found amongst the rubble, so they suggested to the family that the fire was so hot it fully cremated the kids, but George and Jenny had their doubts. They even went to a crematorium where they were told that bones remained even if they were burnt at 2000 degrees for 2 hours. The fire only lasted 45 minutes. Months before the fire, a stranger told George the 2 fuse boxes at the house were going to cause a fire. Around the same time, another man tried to make him buy family life insurance and got angry when George declined and said, "Your goddamn house is going up in smoke and your children are gonna be destroyed. You're going to be paid for the dirty remarks you've been making about Mussolini." Now the night of the fire, Jenny got a weird call from an unknown woman who seemed to be laughing at Jenny, and despite knowing the front door was unlocked, she went to bed anyway. In the middle of the night, she had a long bang on the roof and then a rolling noise. It was later found to be a napalm that had landed on the roof. The house's lines were found cut, they weren't just not working. Someone else said they saw the missing kids in a car across from the fire. Another said she saw 4 of the 5 kids along with 4 Italian adults at a hotel, but despite following lead after lead for decades, the parents never found anything. And finally, at number 1 are the Springfield 3. Back in June of 1992, 19-year-old Susie McCall, her friend Stacy, and Susie's mum Cheryl all went missing from the McCall family home. The girls had just graduated at the start of that month and were last seen around 2 AM the morning after their graduation. The 2 were planning to sleep at their friend's house, but it ended up being way too crowded, so they just went back to Susie's. They did get there since all their stuff was there, but the next day the friends had plans to go to a water park with this couple, and after not showing up, the couple went to the house to find the front door unlocked with nobody inside. There was broken glass on the floor, the lamp had been shattered, and their dog was in distress. While they were there, the girl received several phone calls from a random man who kept making sexual jokes. Stacy's mum got to the house hours later and was searching for clues in a panic and checked their answering machine to find a very strange message, which she then deleted. Like, this is evidence being erased here. But the main suspect of the kidnappings was Robert Craig Cox, a convicted robber and kidnapper. He had apparently told the media the girls had been killed and their bodies would never be recovered, but killers also tend to lie for media attention, so we don't know.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have Dor Bahadur Bista. Dor was a very well-respected anthropologist from Nepal. He was best known for his work with the Takali traders and also for his time as a professor at a university in Nepal. While he was known to go trekking off into the wilderness in order to conduct his research in private, he was, after all, an anthropologist, so he certainly couldn't go totally off the map where there were no other humans at all. In 1995, Dor had published a book and was feeling a little anxious about some of the negative reviews it was getting. Dor was no stranger to criticism or enemies, as many people did not like him due to the fact that he was trying to help empower people who were in a lower class. Before his disappearance, Dor told one of his friends that he was fearing for his safety and that he was considering leaving in order to ensure that nothing bad happened to him. A few weeks after this conversation, somebody saw him boarding a bus, and this was the last time anyone has seen or heard from him. It's obviously very tough to say what happened to him for sure. He had a wife and children who he left behind, and part of me hopes he didn't abandon them, but part of me also hopes he didn't meet some kind of cruel end. I hope that one day someone can figure out what happened and where he went so that his children can be offered some kind of closure. In our number 9 spot today, we have Boris Weisfeiler. Boris Weisfeiler was a Soviet-born mathematician who was living in Pennsylvania. One winter in 1985, he decided to take a nice little trip to southern Chile to do some hiking and escape the bitter cold. Unfortunately,
This is where he ended up disappearing. The last time anyone saw or heard from Boris was in January of that year, and not too long after his last sighting, his backpack was found by a river. This discovery had many people speculating that he may have drowned while trying to cross the river, which is just terrible. But since a body has never been found, there are of course people out there who speculate further. Some people out there believe that Boris may have been abducted. Apparently in 2000 there was enough evidence of a kidnapping that 8 different people were actually arrested and charged with the crime. In the end, however, the case was closed due to the statute of limitations, which seems like that shouldn't have been a factor, but I guess it was. This is just one unsolved mystery that I hope one day we find the answers to. In a number 8 spot today we have Ernest Preisner. Ernest Preisner was a biologist who was particularly interested in studying pheromones, even more specifically the pheromones of clearwings. His research and studies actually led to the discovery of several new species, and he was able to synthetically create a set of 21 pheromones which was able to attract almost all types of winged bugs. Honestly, I didn't know that this was something that people dedicated their lives to, but it sounds very complicated and kinda cool. In July of 1994, Ernest was collaborating on some research, and he went out to check one of the insect traps that was in the mountains of Garmisch-Partenkirchen, but unfortunately, he never made it back. Search parties were sent out, but no one was ever able to find him, and since he had gone alone, it's not like there was anybody who could testify as to what happened to him. Ernest is sadly still missing today, and I truly hope that one day we find out what happened to him on that day.
At number 7 we have Paul Bennewitz. Paul Bennewitz was a businessman and UFO enthusiast who became entangled in this conspiracy surrounding Area 51, mostly during the 1980s. Bennewitz claimed to have discovered evidence of extraterrestrial activity near the Kirtland Air Force Base in New Mexico, which he believed was connected to Area 51. He reported witnessing unidentified flying objects and strange phenomena like unusual lights and electronic disturbances. Bennewitz became convinced that a secret government program was conducting alien research, leading him to share his findings with various other government agencies, including the Air Force and the Defense Intelligence Agency. His claims caught the attention of a UFO investigator named Bill Moore, who admitted later on that he had got caught up in a disinformation campaign against Bennewitz on behalf of the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, and at a 1989 Mutual UFO Network conference, fed him false information about extraterrestrial activities and crashed UFOs, and as a result, Bennewitz's mental health deteriorated, and he became increasingly consumed by paranoia, at one point just locking himself in his room. He eventually ended up in a mental hospital where he was under surveillance for a month. He ended up passing away in 2003. Next up we have the disappearance of Patrick Carnes. On April 13th, 2011, 86-year-old Patrick Carnes was road tripping back to his home in Reno, Nevada after visiting family in Ohio. At 9 p.m. that night, Patrick was pulled over by a police officer for a minor traffic infraction, went along his way, stopped for gas in Wells, Nevada, and that's his last known location. The next morning, his car was discovered abandoned at an exit off of Interstate 80. Nobody knows what happened to him. An extensive search was launched. Nothing turned up. No leads. Nothing. Carnes' son, as well as authorities, believe foul play was involved. People don't often disappear out of nowhere without something bad having happened, and this incident occurred within a month, where 3 other people had gone missing within the same general area. Next up we have Nan Dixon. Patrick Carnes isn't the only person to have gone missing along Interstate 80. This Nevada highway has had a number of mysterious disappearances dating all the way back to 1978. There have been hundreds of unexplained deaths and disappearances, but 73-year-old Nan Dixon went missing in 1978. On September 21st, Dixon was driving from California to Seven Troughs, Nevada to see her brother, but she never showed up. She was reported missing and a search was launched, but there was no sign of her or her vehicle. In 1982, her vehicle was discovered in a ravine under the main road of the Seven Troughs turnoff off that highway. The strange part is that this area had previously been searched. Unfortunately though, there was no other leads as to where she could have been. And so continuing the strange disappearances along the I-80 though, we have Judith Cassida, who went missing in 2006. Cassida, who was 62 at the time, left her home in Reno on February 14th of that year. The last known sighting of her was at a McDonald's in Lovelock, Nevada. After that, she was never seen or heard from again. Only her vehicle was discovered 3 weeks later on the Pumpernickel Valley exit of Interstate 80. The disappearance of Stephen Kocher. In December of 2009, Stephen Kocher, a 30-year-old man from St. George, Utah, embarked on a journey that would ultimately lead to his disappearance. Kocher seemingly vanished without a trace. On December 13th, he was last seen in Henderson, Nevada, where he was spotted on surveillance footage near the Sun City Anthem community. He'd parked his car in a cul-de-sac and made his way in the opposite direction back down the road. He had like a portfolio with him. He was dressed in a white t-shirt. That's really all anyone could see on the footage. Following this sighting, all traces of him disappeared. Only his car was found. Law enforcement agencies launched extensive searches, conducting interviews, scouring the desert landscape, and pursuing leads in hopes of uncovering clues. But despite their efforts, no concrete evidence emerged. His disappearance perplexed both his loved ones and the investigators assigned to the case, and the lack of information surrounding this vanishing has given rise to, of course, numerous theories and speculation. Some think that maybe he experienced a mental health crisis or decided to intentionally go off and start a new life somewhere, while others think it could have been foul play. And at number 2, we have Bob Lazar. Bob Lazar is a rather controversial figure known for his claims about Area 51. In the late 1980s, Lazar came forward with sensational assertions that he had worked in this reverse engineering program with extraterrestrial technology at a site within Area 51 called S4. According to Lazar, he had been recruited to work on advanced propulsion systems of 9 alien spacecrafts held by the US government within aircraft hangars built into a mountainside. Sounds rather familiar to something Jerry Freeman may have witnessed on his trek in the area. Lazar described the technology as being far beyond anything known to human science. Lazar's claims attracted quite a bit of attention, of course. Some thought his claims were incredible, some thought they were incredibly stupid. He presented himself as this whistleblower exposing this classified information. The US government has consistently denied Lazar's assertions and dismissed his credibility. They've maintained that Area 51 is just a classified military facility primarily used for the development and testing of experimental aircrafts, but nonetheless, Lazar's claims have gained a following amongst UFO enthusiasts and conspiracy theorists who see his stories as evidence of some sort of government cover-up going on. But coming in at our number 1 spot, we have the Area 51 call. This was a call made to a radio show called Coast to Coast AM, hosted by Art Bell, which was a paranormal themed show. You'd have all kinds of people call in, from people with stories about their own paranormal encounters to complete skeptics. The phone calls were never screened, and the show was pretty big, being picked up on hundreds of radio stations across the United States and Canada. On one broadcast in 1997 though, Bell received a frantic phone call from a man claiming to have been a former employee in Area 51. And right from the get-go you can tell this guy is very distressed. His voice is shaky, he sounds incredibly nervous. Now, he could totally be acting, but if he was doing a damn good performance. The stress in his voice sounds genuine. The man begins disclosing information about what he describes as extra-dimensional beings that had begun infiltrating the military and the government. He was trying to get as much information out as possible, claiming, quote, "They'll triangulate on this position really, really soon." The conversation didn't last long before the transmission was completely cut. Till this day, the identity of that man has never been revealed.
Number 10. Centralia, Pennsylvania. Centralia was once a thriving mining town, but in 2009 the last living residents were finally evacuated from the town due to its toxic atmosphere and general ground instability. Since mining was no longer a career or necessity in the early 60s, the town's mining shafts were left abandoned and untouched, many of which ran straight beneath the town. In 1962, a fire, whose origins are unknown, ravaged these mining tunnels, turning Centralia into a furnace, burning 140 acres of land and producing temperatures upward of 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit under the earth. 1,000 degrees. That's crazy. Now, this not only caused the ground to crack, but produced toxic smoke as well as ground temperatures that made much of the town uninhabitable. There was no way to extinguish these fires, and they continue to burn hot to this day. Now, if this scenario sounds familiar, that's because it is. Horror fans know that the game Silent Hill was based on this town's tragic history. These days, no one lives there, but I can't believe people were still there in 2009. Number 9. West Castleton, Vermont. West Castleton, once small, was once home to the slate quarries that New England is now known for. It was also the home to immigrants from Ireland, Russia, and Italy post-Civil War, and thrived for some time around 1850 when West Castleton Railroad and Slate Company found themselves on the shore of Lake Bomoseen. For roughly 50 years, West Castleton was able to ride the wave of the boom and bust era, but quickly fell to its eventual demise in 1929. It continued to fight a losing battle against the times as slate was no longer a popular option in construction, and that's what they were known for. By the time the Great Depression took hold of the Green Mountain State, the quarries were drained and rendered unprofitable in the 1930s. Along with its moneymaker becoming abandoned, the town was, as well as the people, up and left their homes in search of better opportunities, which makes the most sense. Remnants of the town remain in Bomoseen State Park, where hikers can find various homes crumbling and caving in but still standing that remind them what the 1930s were like. Number 8. Seattle Underground, Washington. Many have heard of the Great Seattle Fire, which occurred in 1889, but not many know Seattle was also home to an underground shopping network. These stores took a hit after the fire, and though they remained open, the city was eventually condemned in 1907. It had become home to dodgy dealings and was deemed fairly unsafe to wander around at that point, while also giving off a creepy vibe of something that was once thriving, but now remained a shell of what it had once homed. Today, some of these underground passageways have been restored and are open for tours, however many remain closed to the public and are abandoned still to this day.
In our number 7 spot today we have Natalie Christopher. In August of 2019, an astrophysicist by the name of Natalie Christopher went missing after going out for a run during her visit to a Greek island. Her partner was on the trip with her, and when he awoke one morning, Natalie wasn't in the room anymore. He called her and she stated she was out for a run, which of course is totally normal, but when she didn't return for several hours after, alarm bells definitely began to ring. After contacting authorities, searches began to take place immediately, hoping to find Natalie and bring her home safe. A few days after her disappearance, authorities explained that her cell phone had been switched off. After police, fire, pedestrian, and helicopter searches, Natalie's body was eventually found. She was found in a ravine that was in a rough mountainous area approximately 20 meters deep in the water. After a full inspection of the site and an autopsy, her injuries were consistent with a fall in which she had suffered a head trauma. This is obviously a very tragic ending to this story, but I am at least glad that her loved ones were able to receive some kind of closure for this terrible situation. In our number 6 spot today we have Pangjiamu. The Lopner Desert is known for its aggressive landscape. It has soft riverbeds and sand dunes that are known to shift. It's definitely not uncommon for an entire hillside to collapse, burying everything underneath it. This brings us to June 17th, 1980, when Pangjiamu, who is a biologist at the Shanghai Institute of Biochemistry and Cell Biology, and some of his colleagues were on an expedition in this desert. That morning, Pang noticed that they were running short on some supplies. He left a note stating that he was heading out to look for water, and he left. left, but he was never seen again. There was a huge search for him that involved soldiers, helicopters, police, and their dogs, but unfortunately neither Pang or his body have ever been found. Many people believe that he may have been the victim of one of those hillside collapses, but in all honesty, it could have been anything. Other expeditions have come across bodies in this desert, none of which have been Pang so far, but I hope that one day someone is able to find him. In our number 5 spot today, we have Timothy Cunningham. Timothy Cunningham was a Harvard-educated epidemiologist who worked for the Center for Disease Control and Prevention before his disappearance in February of 2018. He was 35 years old at the time and was working on tackling both the Ebola and Zika outbreaks. On February 7th, he resigned from a special deployment team that he was working with. His boss explained that he would have tried to convince him to stay for a few more months, but that Timothy just seemed too ready to move on. Timothy left work on February 12th saying that he was feeling unwell, but a coworker has since explained that this was shortly after Timothy learned that he was being passed over for a promotion. The day before his disappearance, Timothy told his neighbors that they should erase his phone number from their phones. Searches for Timothy went on for almost 2 months, and during this time authorities found 4 separate bodies that did not end up being Timothy's. Eventually though, Timothy's body was found in a river and it was confirmed that he had drowned. After more investigation, it was determined that Timothy had unfortunately taken his own life. People who knew Timothy began to recount some of the struggles he had that could have led to this extremely tragic situation, but I also think it's worth mentioning that there are many people out there who believe some sort of foul play was actually involved and that it may have had to do with his line of work. It is a very sad ending to an already sad story, and I hope Timothy's family has been able to support each other during these undoubtedly difficult years. In our number 4 spot today, we have Percy Fawcett. Percy Fawcett set out in 1925 to search the Amazon jungle for what had yet to be discovered. As an archaeologist and geologist, he was looking for an ancient lost civilization called the Lost City of Z. Percy went on this adventure with his oldest son Jack, one of Jack's friends, and a couple dogs. Unfortunately, after entering the jungle, none of them were ever seen again. No trace was left and no one has been able to find his body, despite it being almost a full century since he disappeared. Some people believe he may have been lost, perhaps he was injured, maybe he even had some kind of fatal animal encounter, but there are some people who believe he just decided to abandon his life to live a life in the jungle. At the end of the day, his lost city of Z kind of did end up existing, as archaeologists have discovered large stone cities that were hidden in the jungle pretty close to where Percy would have disappeared. It has also happened that many people who went on expeditions in this jungle did not end up making it out, so it's probably best to just stay away from that one. In our number 3 spot today, we have Suzanne Eaton. In 2019, an American biologist named Suzanne Eaton disappeared while she was in Greece. Suzanne was a scientist and professor at the Max Planck Institute of Molecular Cell Biology and Genetics in Dresden, Germany, but was in Greece at the time of her disappearance for a conference. On July 2nd of 2019, she was last seen playing the piano in the lobby of her hotel before it was believed she went out on a run, which is the last time she was spotted. It was believed for a while that she may have fallen and injured herself or something of that nature. Of course, authorities began a massive search and it took about a week for them to find anything. On July 8th of that year, Suzanne's body was found in an older World War II bunker and she unfortunately had been killed. This of course turned the search party into an investigation, which led to a 27-year-old Greek man who did end up confessing to this very terrible crime. In October of 2020, he was tried and found guilty, which then led to him being given a life sentence in prison. Since this terrible day, the Institute of Molecular Biotechnology in Austria has started a memorial fund in Suzanne's honor, which is aimed to support young scientists' endeavors in interdisciplinary topics. I truly think that this is a wonderful way to remember Suzanne. In our number 2 spot today, we have Vladimir Alexandrov. A Soviet physicist by the name of Vladimir Alexandrov made quite a name for himself when he came up with the mathematical model for nuclear winter. Nuclear winter is what is hypothesized will happen after large-scale nuclear war and firestorms, and it is the long and severe cooling effect that will happen to our global climate. So yeah, he's an important guy and the concept is just absolutely terrifying. So that's a little bit about Vladimir, and in 1985 he was apparently visiting Madrid when he just up and vanished. No one really knows what happened to him, but there are a couple theories. The first being that since he was in Madrid, he might have chosen to abandon his country, which is why he was never heard from again. The second, crazier theory is that there are people who believe that the whole nuclear winter thing might have just been heavily promoted by Russia in order to convince people in the United States to protest against America and the nuclear weapons program. This theory ends with the KGB kidnapping Vladimir because he was going to expose the nuclear winter theory as being untrue, and they wanted to stop that from happening. I feel like they could have found a guy who actually believed in the theory to say he came up with this mathematical model for it, but hey, I'm not a scientist. Unfortunately, it is likely we may never know what exactly happened to him, unless Vladimir himself ends up finding a way to let us know. In our number 1 spot today we have Ettore Majorana. Ettore was an Italian physicist who was born on August 5th, 1906 and disappeared on March 25th, 1938 under some pretty mysterious circumstances. Ettore was very gifted with math from a young age, and when it was time for him to attend university, he studied engineering first before making the switch to physics. In 1933, he went to Germany and worked on the theory of the nucleus. In the fall of that same year, he returned home to Italy, but he was very sick. While in Germany, he developed acute gastritis and was also suffering from nervous exhaustion. He was immediately receiving medical treatment, which included being put on a very strict diet. This whole situation led him to become very isolated, and his reclusive nature only grew and grew over the years. For almost full 4 years, he shut himself off completely from friends and wasn't even publishing works. In March of 1938, he boarded a boat from Palermo and was headed to Naples, but he was never seen again. Before he headed to Palermo, he apparently withdrew all of his money from his bank account, and it was said that he had traveled there in the first place to visit a friend, but that friend was actually in California at the time. On the day that he disappeared, he also sent a letter to his boss that was basically just him quitting his job. And he also sent telegrams canceling any other plans that he had made. Some people believe that he may have taken his own life, others believe he escaped to Venezuela or Argentina, some people believe that he was kidnapped, and honestly the list just goes on. I wonder if we will ever be able to find out what truly happened to him that day.
Want more alien encounters? Well, click the video right here to be introduced to some of the weirdest encounters we have ever seen. Click now.